Foot or hand? The man said it the way you'd ask someone to choose between coffee and tea. Casual, patient. The tone of someone who has asked the question before and who finds the asking more interesting than the answering. He was standing in the yard of the Dune Ranch in the gray light before sunrise, and the question was directed at a boy of 16 who was trying very hard not to let the trembling in his hands show. Thomas Dune, Caleb's son. The boy had his father's jaw and his mother's eyes. And 3 weeks ago, he had stood at a grave in the Montana Territory and watched the man who had made the world safe around him get put into the ground. Now a man named Doyle was asking him to choose. Foot or hand, Doyle said again. Not louder, just again. The repetition of someone who understands that the second time a question lands differently than the first. We're going to need an answer before the lady of the house decides she'd rather lose one of yours than sign the paper. Margaret Dune was in the doorway. She was not crying. She was not pleading. She was watching Doyle with the specific expression of a woman who has been married to a dangerous man for 22 years and who has developed, over those years, a very precise understanding of what dangerous actually looks like. What Doyle was doing was theater. What was behind Doyle? The men with the surveyor's maps and the land office seals and the briefcase that a lawyer named Aldous Fitch had brought from Helena. That was the real danger. You can shoot theater. You can't shoot a deed transfer. Cole Harlan had been watching from the ridge for 6 minutes when Doyle said the question the second time. 6 minutes of counting men, reading positions, understanding the architecture of what he was looking at. 4 with guns, 1 lawyer. 1 man who hadn't spoken yet but who stood slightly apart from the rest in the way that men stand when they're in charge, and they know it, and they're comfortable enough in that knowledge to let others do the talking. The man who hadn't spoken was named Hargrove Steed. Cole didn't know that yet. He learned it later. What he knew in that moment was this. Shadow was behind him on the ridge, patient and dark against the Montana morning. The boy was in the yard with his hands at his sides and something in his face that was very close to the thing that breaks and very far from the thing that yields. And Cole had 6 minutes of watching done and a decision made. He rode down from the ridge at a walk, not a canter, not a gallop, a walk. The specific pace of someone who has decided there is no urgency because the urgency belongs to him now, not to the men in the yard, and he is choosing how to distribute it. Doyle saw him coming. Everyone in the yard saw him coming. The man who hadn't spoken watched Shadow descend the ridge with the eyes of someone recalculating something. Cole stopped at the fence line, looked at Doyle. "That's a good question," Cole said. Doyle looked at him. "What is?" "Foot or hand," Cole said. "I've been thinking about it on the way down. I'd say foot." He looked at Doyle with the pale blue eyes that had been described in too many newspaper accounts. A man can still ride with a bad hand. He can't run. The yard went very quiet. The boy looked at Cole. The man who hadn't spoken, Hargrove Steed, took 1 step forward. And the morning of the Dune Ranch became something other than what it had been 60 seconds ago. Before we continue, Caleb Dune has been in the ground for 3 weeks. And the world he held in place with nothing more than his name and his presence is already coming apart. That's what happens when the last of a certain kind of man disappears. The door doesn't close slowly, it falls. Stay with this one. The turns in this story are quiet, the kind you don't notice until you're already through them. Subscribe if you haven't. Tell me your country in the comments. Cole rode a long way to get here. Now, back to Montana. Back to the yard, back to the question that changed everything. To understand what the Dune Ranch meant in the autumn of 1887, you need to understand what Caleb Dune had been. Not the legend, the man. The legend is easy to describe. The stories that traveled through saloons from Billings to Bozeman, the newspaper accounts that got the facts approximately right and the details completely wrong. The specific mythology that accumulates around men who are very good at something that frightens people. Caleb Dune had killed 11 men in documented confrontations over the course of a 25-year career in the Montana Territory. Not because he was violent by nature, because he was precise by nature, and because precision in that place and that time was something that the world occasionally required. The ranch sat in the Dune Pass, a natural corridor through the mountains 30 miles south of Helena that the early settlers had named for Caleb's father, who had been the first man to map it and who had built the original structure in 1851. The pass was the only viable low-elevation route through that section of the Rockies for 50 miles in either direction. Before the Northern Pacific began planning its southern Montana branch line in 1884, that fact had been interesting but not consequential. After the survey teams came through in 1885 and filed their route assessment, the Dune Pass became the single most strategically valuable piece of private land in the territory. Caleb had known this. He'd known it before the survey teams arrived, because he was the kind of man who watched what was coming and thought about what it meant. He'd sat on the porch of the ranch he'd inherited from his father and looked at the pass, and understood that what he was looking at was not just his home, but an argument. And Caleb Dune was very good at arguments. While he was alive, the Northern Pacific's lawyers had made 4 purchase offers. Each time Caleb had declined. Not angrily, not with threats, with the specific courtesy of a man who holds all the leverage and who knows it, and who is comfortable enough in that knowledge to be polite about it. The railroad needed the pass. The pass needed Caleb's signature. Caleb's signature was not available. That was the situation for 3 years. Then in September of 1887, Caleb Dune died of something so ordinary that the territory didn't know how to process it. Pneumonia, not a bullet, not a knife, not the culmination of some dramatic confrontation that the legend had been building toward. A cold that got into his chest in August, and that the body of a 53-year-old man who had put himself through considerable punishment over the years couldn't quite fight off. He was dead in 3 weeks, and the world that had organized itself around his presence, the subtle, constant pressure of a reputation that kept certain men making certain calculations and arriving at certain conclusions. That world lasted approximately as long as it took the news to reach Helena. 3 days after the funeral, the Northern Pacific's acquisition representative contacted the land office in Helena about expedited proceedings. 10 days after the funeral, the first letter arrived at the ranch. 14 days after the funeral, the first men appeared at the fence line. 18 days after the funeral, Margaret Dune sent for Cole Harlan. Cole had received the letter in Missoula. He'd been there for 2 weeks, which was longer than he usually stayed anywhere. But there had been a reason, and the reason had resolved itself, and he'd been thinking about moving on anyway. He read the letter twice, folded it, put it in his coat pocket. Then he read it a third time, which he only did when something in a letter was going to change what happened next. Margaret had written 4 sentences. Caleb is gone. Men are coming for the ranch. Thomas is 16, and I am out of arguments that don't require Caleb to be standing behind them. I wouldn't ask if I could think of anyone else. 4 sentences. No exaggeration. No theater. Margaret Dune had learned from 22 years of living with a man who didn't waste words that the most accurate thing you could do was say exactly what was true and let the truth do the work. Cole saddled Shadow that afternoon. He rode through the night. Montana in late October has a specific quality in the hours before dawn that belongs to no other place and no other season. The cold is not hostile. It is simply present, the way stone is present, without opinion about what it does to the things it touches. The stars are close in a way that the lower territories don't produce, as if the altitude has thinned the distance between the earth and whatever is above it. Cole rode through that cold for 7 hours. He thought about Caleb. Not the legend, the man. The first time he'd met Caleb Dune was in the winter of 1871, in a town that doesn't exist anymore, in a situation that had been developing badly for about 4 hours before Caleb appeared and developed it differently. Cole had been 19. Caleb had been 37. And what Caleb had done in that situation was not what most men in his position would have done. He hadn't used the confrontation to demonstrate what he was. He'd used it to stop the confrontation. Afterward, over coffee and the wreckage of whatever the town saloon had been before the evening's events, Caleb had said something that Cole had thought about many times in the 16 years since. The fastest draw in the room is the draw nobody sees, because nobody needed to reach for one. Cole had carried that. He was carrying it now, riding north through the Montana dark toward a ranch where men had shown up because the draw that had kept them away for years was buried in the ground. He reached the ridge above the Dune Ranch at the first gray light. He stayed there for 6 minutes. He counted 4 men, 1 lawyer, 1 man who stood apart, and a boy in the yard who was trying not to let his hands show what was in them. Cole rode down. Hargrove Steed was 44 years old and had spent 20 of them learning that the West that the newspapers wrote about, the West of gunfighters and cattle drives and frontier justice, was a story that the New West was in the process of replacing with something more durable and more profitable. He had been educated in Chicago, had practiced land law in St. Louis, had moved to Helena in 1880 when it became clear to anyone paying attention that Montana was going to be the next major theater of the economic expansion that the railroad was driving across the continent. Steed understood something that most people didn't articulate clearly, but that everyone in his business knew. The frontier didn't close because the land ran out. It closed because the legal instruments caught up. Once you had a functioning court system, a recorded deed, a surveyor's assessment, and a land office that processed transfers, once you had all of that, you didn't need to be faster than the other man. You just needed your paperwork to be better than his. The Dune Ranch had a problem with its paperwork. Not a catastrophic problem, not a fraudulent one, just the specific kind of ambiguity that accumulated in land that had been settled before the territorial government existed, before the federal land office had standardized its recording procedures, before any of the instruments that now defined ownership had been applied to this particular piece of Montana earth. The original Dune land claim, filed by Caleb's father in 1851 under the terms of the Oregon Territory provisions, described the boundaries in terms of landmarks: the North Creek, the Big Pine, the stone formation east of the pass. Landmarks that existed in 1851 and that had since moved, been removed, or been renamed. That ambiguity was the weapon, not the guns Doyle carried, not the threats. Those were the visible part of the operation, the part designed to create urgency and panic in the people on the receiving end. The real weapon was in the briefcase that Aldous Fitch had brought from Helena, a competing land claim, filed 6 months ago by a shell corporation connected to the Northern Pacific. Based on a surveyor's interpretation of the original 1,851 boundaries that placed 3/4 of the Dune Ranch's most valuable acreage, including the pass itself, outside the scope of the original claim. Not fraudulent, just aggressive. The kind of legal argument that loses eventually, maybe, in a territorial court with the right judge in the right time and the right documentation from the other side. The question was what happened to a widow and a 16-year-old boy in the months that they eventually took to arrive. Cole stepped down from shadow at the fence line. He tied the horse without hurrying. He walked into the yard. Doyle watched him come with the specific assessment of a professional trying to place a stranger in a category. "You have business here?" Doyle said. "The widow sent for me," Cole said. Steed stepped forward. "And you are?" Cole looked at Steed, at the suit, at the briefcase that the lawyer was carrying, at the papers that were visible through the partially open flap. "Someone who knew Caleb Dune," Cole said. He looked at the boy. "Go inside," Cole said to Thomas. Thomas looked at Doyle, then at Cole. "Go inside," Cole said again. The same tone. The tone of someone who has decided how this next portion is going to proceed, and who is giving the people around him the chance to arrange themselves accordingly. Thomas went inside. Cole looked at Doyle. "Foot or hand was a question you were asking a 16-year-old boy," Cole said. Flat, even. Not an accusation, a description. "It was a negotiating tactic," Doyle said. "It was a threat directed at a child," Cole said. "Mr. Steed began. "Cole Harlan," Cole said. The yard was very quiet. One of the four men with guns did something with his posture that was not quite stepping back, but was the precursor to it. The readjustment of a man updating his understanding of the situation. Steed looked at Cole with a different quality of attention than he'd been using before. "Mr. Harlan," Steed said, "this is a legal matter. There are outstanding questions about the title of this property that—" "I know what the questions are," Cole said. "I read the letter the widow received from your land office." Steed paused. "Then you know the situation is complicated." "I know the situation is being made complicated," Cole said. "Those aren't the same thing." Steed looked at him, the measured look of a man who is deciding whether the obstacle in front of him is the kind that moves or the kind that has to be worked around. "We're operating within the law," Steed said. "I know you are," Cole said. "That's why we're having this conversation instead of something shorter." He looked at Doyle, at the four men. "Leave the yard," Cole said. "Come back with a court order and a judge's name on it. Until then, you're standing on private property." Doyle looked at Steed. Steed held Cole's gaze for a moment. Then he looked at the briefcase in Fitch's hands, at the ranch house, at the past beyond it. "We'll be back," Steed said. "Not a threat, a schedule." "I'll be here," Cole said. They left. Cole watched them go until the dust settled on the road north. Then he turned and walked to the ranch house. Margaret Doone was in the doorway. She looked at Cole with the eyes of someone who has been holding something very heavy for a long time, and who is not yet sure whether help has arrived, or whether what has arrived will simply add to the weight. "You came," she said. "You asked," Cole said. "Caleb said you would," Margaret said. "If I ever needed to. He said you were the kind of man who came." Cole looked at her, at the woman who had been married to his oldest friend for 22 years and who was standing in the doorway of the ranch that friend had spent his life protecting. "Put on coffee," Cole said, "and tell me everything you have in writing. Here is something worth understanding about the legal landscape of Montana Territory in 1887 and what it meant for families who had been on the land since before the legal landscape existed. The Homestead Act of 1862 had created a framework for land ownership in the Western Territories that was, in principle, designed to protect the claims of settlers who had worked and improved the land. In practice, the framework had gaps, places where the law's intentions and the law's mechanisms didn't align. One of those gaps was the pre-1862 settler. Families who had arrived in the territories before the Homestead Act had their claims governed by a patchwork of earlier provisions: the Oregon Donation Land Act, pre-territorial military grants, and in some cases, simply the recorded testimony of settlement. When the territorial governments were formalized, and when land office procedures were standardized in the 1870 seconds and 1880 seconds, these earlier claims were supposed to be reconciled with the new system. In most cases, they were. In some cases, particularly where the original boundary descriptions relied on landmarks that had changed, the reconciliation produced ambiguities. And ambiguities, in the hands of aggressive lawyers with corporate clients, became instruments. The Northern Pacific had used this before. In Oregon, in Washington, in Idaho. The same playbook, slightly modified for each territory's specific legal framework. Find the ambiguity, file the competing claim, create urgency, offer a settlement that was less than the land was worth, but more than what a fight would cost a family that couldn't afford lawyers. Most families took the settlement. Caleb Doone hadn't, because Caleb had spent 15 years anticipating this exact scenario and doing something about it. Margaret showed Cole what was in the iron box under the floorboards of the back bedroom. Cole sat at the kitchen table and went through it methodically while Thomas watched from across the room and Margaret made the coffee she'd been asked to make. The original 1851 claim document, filed by Caleb's father, with the landmark descriptions that were the source of the ambiguity. A survey commissioned by Caleb in 1879, 8 years before the Northern Pacific's competing claim. a professional assessment by a certified federal surveyor that translated the 1,851 landmark descriptions into modern coordinates and confirmed the dune property boundaries with the precision that the land office now required. 3 letters from the Helena Federal Land Office acknowledging receipt of the 1,879 survey and confirming that the dune claim was recorded and recognized under its terms. And something else. A letter, folded and sealed with wax that had dried to the color of old blood, addressed to the Honorable Samuel Cord, Associate Justice, 9th Circuit Court, to be opened in the event of the death of Caleb Dune. Cole looked at the letter. He looked at Margaret. "Did you know about this?" Cole said. "I knew there was a letter," Margaret said. "He told me once that there was something in the box for a judge in case anything happened. He didn't tell me what." "Samuel Cord," Cole said. "The 9th Circuit." "Do you know him?" Thomas said from across the room. Cole looked at the sealed letter. "I know of him," Cole said. "Federal Circuit Judge, been on the bench in Montana since '81. He paused. "He and Caleb knew each other?" "Caleb knew a lot of people," Margaret said. "He never talked much about who." Cole picked up the letter carefully, set it back down. "He planned for this," Cole said, not as a question. Margaret poured the coffee. "Caleb planned for everything he could think of," she said. "He used to say that a man who only plans for what's in front of him is only half prepared." Thomas was looking at the letter. "What does it say?" Thomas said. "We don't know yet," Cole said, "but I think we're going to find out." They came back the next morning. Not Steed. Steed knew better than to come himself for the second visit. He sent Doyle and the 4 men in a document from the territorial court in Helena that authorized the land office to conduct a formal survey of the disputed boundaries pending adjudication of the competing claim. It was legal, properly signed. The right kind of paper with the right kind of stamps. Cole read it at the fence line while Doyle waited. The survey authorization was real. What it meant in practice was that surveyors would arrive within 2 weeks, would conduct their work on the property, and that their findings would be submitted to the territorial court as evidence in a proceeding that could take months or years to resolve. During which time the question of who had the right to occupy the property was, legally, pending. Pending in the hands of men like Steed meant pressure. It meant the weight of uncertainty applied continuously until the party with fewer resources to sustain the uncertainty made the rational decision to settle. Cole handed the document back to Doyle. "The survey is authorized," Cole said. "The surveyors can come." Doyle looked at him, not quite surprised. The document was the thing Steed had counted on to move Cole from the property. "They'll need access to the full," Doyle began. "They'll have it," Cole said. "Surveyors doing their authorized work have access to what they need. Armed men intimidating a widow and her son do not." Doyle looked at him. "We'll be present during the survey," Doyle said. "No," Cole said. You have authorization for a survey," Cole said, "not for occupation. If you'd like to clarify the scope of the authorization, take it back to the judge who signed it." Something moved in Doyle's face. The specific expression of a man who has been given clear instructions by the man who pays him and who is encountering, in the execution of those instructions, a resistance he wasn't briefed to expect. "Mr. Harlan," Doyle said, "the railroad is not mentioned in that document," Cole said. "The Northern Pacific Land Corporation is the filing party in the competing claim, not the railroad. Different legal entity." "You know land law," Doyle said. "I know enough," Cole said. Doyle looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the ranch house, at the pass beyond it. "This doesn't change the outcome," Doyle said. "The claim is filed. The court will decide." "Yes," Cole said, "it will." Doyle left. Cole went back inside and wrote 2 letters. The first was to a lawyer in Helena. Not the Northern Pacific's lawyer, a different one. Someone Cole had known for years and who owed him a favor that was about to be collected. The second was to Judge Samuel Cord, 9th Circuit. He enclosed Caleb's sealed letter. Thomas rode both letters to the telegraph office in Helena that afternoon. 50 miles round trip. He was back before midnight. 2 days later, a man arrived at the Dune Ranch. Alone, on a good horse. Wearing clothes that said he wasn't from the territory by birth, but had been here long enough to know what the territory required. His name was Arthur Pembroke. He was the lawyer Cole had written to. He spent 4 hours at the kitchen table with the iron box and its contents. He read the 1879 survey 3 times. He read the land office letters carefully. He made notes in a small leather book. Then he looked up. The 1879 survey is legitimate, Pembroke said. It was filed before the competing claim, and it was acknowledged by the land office. Steed's argument rests on the contention that the 1879 survey misinterpreted the 1851 boundaries. That's a legal argument, not a factual one.
Can it succeed?
Margaret said. In front of the right judge, almost anything can succeed, Pembroke said. In front of the right judge, with a legitimate competing survey and 2 years of proceedings, it can tie up a property long enough to accomplish what the filing party actually wants. Which is the widow to give up, Thomas said. Pembroke looked at the boy. Yes, he said. And in front of a different judge, Cole said. With the 1879 survey, the land office letters, and a strong argument about the integrity of the original claim, it's dismissible. Which judge? Cole said. Cord, Pembroke said. 9th Circuit. He's done well by settlers with clean documentation. Cole looked at Margaret. I sent him Caleb's letter, Cole said. Pembroke looked at Cole, then at the empty space on the table where the sealed letter had been. What was in it? Pembroke said. We don't know yet, Cole said. Here is something about Judge Samuel Cord that the newspapers never wrote about, because it wasn't the kind of story that newspapers wrote. In the winter of 1874, Samuel Cord had been a territorial prosecutor in Bozeman, traveling between courthouses on a circuit that covered more ground than any single man could reasonably cover in Montana winter conditions. He had gotten caught in a storm in the pass south of Helena, the pass that Caleb Dune's father had mapped, the pass that the Dune Ranch had sat beside for 36 years. Cord's horse had broken a leg on the ice. He had been on foot in a blizzard, 6 miles from anything, in temperatures that the territory produces specifically to remind men that their presence there is conditional. Caleb Dune had found him. Not by design. Caleb had been checking his fence line that morning, the specific, unheroic reason that most rescues actually happen. He found a man in a bad coat and worse boots trying to make 6 miles in conditions that would have made it 4 before the end. He brought Cord to the ranch, fed him, warmed him, kept him for 3 days until the storm passed and the roads were manageable. The 2 men had spent those 3 days talking about the law, about the territory, about the specific challenge of applying Eastern legal frameworks to a Western reality that didn't always cooperate with them. When Cord left, he told Caleb that he owed him a debt that he intended to honor. Caleb had told him he didn't owe anything. But Caleb had written the letter, because Caleb planned for everything he could think of. The reply from Judge Cord arrived 6 days after Cole had sent the letters. Margaret read it at the kitchen table with Thomas beside her and Cole across from them. It was 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph acknowledged receipt of Caleb Dune's letter and expressed condolences. The second paragraph stated that Judge Cord had reviewed the competing land claim filed by the Northern Pacific Land Corporation and had identified procedural concerns about the manner in which the 1879 Dune survey had been characterized in the filing. The third paragraph was the one that mattered. Judge Cord was requesting that the territorial court in Helena transfer jurisdiction of the Dune land claim dispute to the 9th Circuit on grounds of federal interest, specifically the involvement of a railroad corporation that operated under federal charter. The transfer would remove the case from the territorial court where Steed had filed and place it before Judge Samuel Cord. Margaret set the letter down on the table. She looked at it for a moment. Thomas looked at it. Cole looked at the window, at the pass. at the land that Caleb's father had mapped in 1851 and that Caleb had spent his life protecting, and that 3 weeks after Caleb's death was still the Dune Ranch. "He did it from the grave," Thomas said. His voice had something in it that wasn't quite disbelief and wasn't quite awe, something between the two. "He did it while he was alive," Cole said. "He just made sure it would still work when he wasn't." Margaret picked up the letter again, read the third paragraph a second time. Then she folded it carefully and set it back on the table. "Caleb used to say," Margaret said, "that the most dangerous thing a man could do was make himself the only defense something had." She looked at Cole. "He said that sooner or later every man goes, and when he goes, everything that depended on his being there goes with him, unless he built something that didn't depend on him." She looked at the iron box. "He built the survey," she said. "He built the land office letters. He built the letter to Cord." A pause. "He built Thomas." The boy looked at his mother. "He didn't leave the ranch undefended," Margaret said. "He just left it defended by something other than himself." Cole looked at the table. He thought about Caleb's voice in a ruined saloon in 1871. "The fastest draw in the room is the draw nobody sees, because nobody needed to reach for one." Caleb had spent 30 years applying that principle to everything. Steed sent Doyle one more time. It was the visit that Cole had been waiting for, not because he wanted it, but because he understood that the news of the jurisdictional transfer would reach Steed before it reached the newspapers, and that Steed would send someone to make one final assessment of the situation before deciding how to proceed. Doyle came alone this time. That was information. A man who comes alone to the property of a man like Cole Harlan, after having been there with 4 armed men twice before, is either very confident or has been told to communicate something specific and has decided that showing up alone changes the quality of the communication. Cole met him at the fence line. "The transfer went through," Doyle said. "I know," Cole said. "Steed wants you to understand that this isn't over." "Tell Steed that I understand," Cole said. "And tell him that the 1879 survey is going to hold in Cord's court, and that when it does, the Northern Pacific Land Corporation's filing will be dismissed with costs, and that the legal fees and the costs and the damages for the intimidation campaign will be itemized and submitted to Cord's court as a separate proceeding." Doyle looked at him. "That's a considerable threat," Doyle said. "It's not a threat," Cole said. "It's a schedule." Doyle was quiet for a moment. "The railroad needs the pass," Doyle said. "I know," Cole said. "There's no going around it." "I know that too." "Then what is this?" Doyle said. "The widow and the boy can't use the pass. It's not a road for the ranch. It's just land. If the railroad offered fair value—" "The railroad had 4 years to offer fair value," Cole said, "when Caleb was alive. They offered half value. They offered legal pressure. They offered men with guns and a question about feet and hands directed at a 16-year-old boy." He looked at Doyle. "Fair value means something different now." Doyle held his gaze. "You're going to want a number," Doyle said. "The widow will want a number," Cole said. "When the time is right, through her lawyer, in writing, with a court filing that protects the agreement." "And you?" Cole looked at the pass, at the mountains beyond it, at the Montana sky doing what Montana skies do in November, filling itself with the specific gray that means the season has arrived and is here to stay. "I'll be gone by then," Cole said. Doyle studied him. "You're not staying," Doyle said. "No." "Then what was this? What did you come here for?" Cole looked at him. "A friend sent for me," Cole said. "The friend couldn't come herself, so she sent for me." Doyle looked at the ranch, at the pass, at Cole. "Caleb Dune," Doyle said. "Caleb Dune," Cole said. Something moved in Doyle's expression. Not softness exactly, but the adjustment of a man who has been in enough situations to recognize, when he finally sees it, the thing that motivated the other man. "He was that good?" Doyle said. "He was better," Cole said. And he had the sense to know that being good with a gun was the least interesting thing about him.
Doyle was quiet.
Then he turned his horse and rode north. Cole watched him go. When the dust settled, Cole went back to the ranch. Cole stayed 3 more days. Not because there was more to do. The legal situation was as stable as it was going to get until Cord's court convened. But because there was work on the ranch that Thomas couldn't do alone, and that Margaret had been deferring since Caleb died. And because Cole had spent enough time around people who needed things done to know when he was looking at one. They repaired the north fence, cut and stacked the wood that the woodshed needed for the winter, checked the roof of the barn and replaced 3 sections of shingle that had gone soft in the summer rain. Thomas worked beside Cole without speaking much. The boy had his father's way with silence, the understanding that presence and words are different things, and that sometimes presence is the more communicative of the two. On the second afternoon, while they were working on the barn, Thomas said something. "He talked about you," Thomas said. Cole kept working. "What did he say?" "He said you were the first person he met who understood what he meant when he said the most dangerous draw was the one nobody sees." Cole looked at the boy. "He said you were 19, Thomas said, and that most men took years to learn it. Some never did." Cole looked at the shingle in his hands. "Your father had a way of seeing what was there," Cole said, "before it had a chance to show itself." "That's what made him dangerous?" Thomas said. "That's what made him worth listening to," Cole said. "The dangerous part was that he was right often enough that people stopped testing it."
Thomas was quiet. "Am I like him?" Thomas said.
Cole looked at the boy, at the jaw and the eyes and the hands that had tried not to shake in the yard when Doyle asked the question. "You didn't break when you needed not to break," Cole said. "That's more than most men have at 16. Thomas looked at the mountains. "He said the West was changing," Thomas said. "He said men like him were becoming something people read about instead of something they knew." "He was right," Cole said. "Is that bad?" Cole thought about it honestly. "It's just true," Cole said. "Things change. The question is what they change into." He looked at the pass, at the road that the Northern Pacific needed, at the land that a family had held for 36 years. "Your father made sure what mattered lasted," Cole said. "The rest of it, the legend, the reputation, the things that made men decide not to try him, those go with the man. But the survey and the letters and the deed and the letter to Cord, those stay." Thomas nodded slowly. "That's what you do with a life," Cole said. "You use it to build things that don't need you to keep standing." On the last evening, Cole sat on the porch with Margaret while Thomas did the last of the evening work in the barn. The Montana night was coming in from the north, with the cold that had no agenda but was simply the season, doing what it did. Margaret sat in the chair that had been Caleb's chair, not because she was performing something, because it was the most comfortable chair on the porch, and she had always sat in it when Caleb wasn't there. They didn't talk for a while. "Will it be enough?" Margaret said. "The survey, the letter, Cord's court." "It'll be enough to win," Cole said. "Whether the railroad accepts what winning means is a different conversation." "They'll come back with a real offer," Margaret said. "They will. And what should it be?" Cole looked at the pass. "What Caleb would have wanted for it," Cole said. "Not what the railroad wants to pay, what the land is actually worth to them." "He never told me a number," Margaret said. "No," Cole said. "But Pembroke will know. And when they come with the offer, have Pembroke there, and have Cord's ruling in hand, and take the time you need." Margaret was quiet. "He trusted you," she said finally. "Not about the negotiation, about everything." "He trusted his own preparation," Cole said. "I just carried the letter." "He would have said that too," Margaret said. "I know," Cole said. "I learned it from him." The barn door opened, and Thomas came across the yard in the dark with the specific walk of a boy who is becoming something else, and who doesn't know it yet, but whose body has started to understand. The 3 of them sat on the porch for an hour without saying much. The pass was dark and quiet. The mountains were the mountains, and the dune ranch was still the dune ranch. Cole left before the house was awake. He had learned this from Caleb, that goodbyes extended things unnecessarily, that the right ending was often the one that happened before the other person was ready to say goodbye, because readiness produced ceremony, and ceremony produced the feeling that something was ending, when what was actually happening was just a person going back to what they were. He saddled Shadow in the dark barn. The horse stood solid and patient, the way he always did. Cole checked the cinch, checked the saddlebag, put his hand on Shadow's neck for a moment the way he sometimes did when he needed to stand still for a second and let the world be whatever it was. Then he led the horse out. The pass was silver in the last starlight. Cole mounted. He looked at the ranch house once. Dark, quiet. The way something looks when it is genuinely at rest rather than simply waiting. He rode south. Here is what the legend of Cole Harlan never accurately conveyed. The part of it that stayed in saloons and newspapers was the visible part. The confrontations, the gunfights, the moments where everything came down to a single decision and Cole made it correctly. The part that didn't travel was the rest of it. The night rides, the letters written at kitchen tables, the conversations on porches with widows who needed to know their ground was solid, the hours of fence repair and roof work that nobody wrote about because nobody was watching, the part where the legend was just a man doing what needed doing. Cole rode south through the Montana morning. He thought about Caleb's letter to Cord. He hadn't read it. He wouldn't read it. It hadn't been meant for him. But he thought about what it probably said. A man writing a letter to a judge he had saved from a blizzard 13 years ago. A man who knew he was sick and who sat down and thought about everything he'd built and everything he hadn't and what would happen when he was gone. A man who decided that the most important thing he could do with the time he had left was make sure the people he was leaving behind were defended by something more durable than his presence. That was the kind of man Caleb Dune had been. Not the gunfighter, not the legend. The man who understood that being good with a gun was the least interesting thing about him. Shadow moved at a walk through the cold. The pass grew smaller behind them. Cole didn't look back. He didn't need to. The Dune Ranch was behind him, still standing, still the Dune Ranch. And the man who had spent his life making sure of that had managed to keep on making sure of it even after he'd run out of life to do it with. That was enough. That was more than enough. The Northern Pacific Land Corporation's competing claim was dismissed with prejudice by Judge Samuel Cord in January of 1888. The opinion was 42 pages. The relevant section, the one that the territorial newspapers reprinted in part, and that the lawyers argued about for months, was 3 paragraphs long and stated, in the measured language that federal judges use when they want to be clear without being inflammatory, that the 1879 Dune Survey was valid, that the land office acknowledgments were legally binding, and that the competing claim had been filed in a manner that reflected a misrepresentation of the documentary record. The costs were assessed to the filing party. 6 weeks after the ruling, the Northern Pacific's actual legal representative, not Steed, someone senior, from the railroad's main office in St. Paul, contacted Margaret Dune's lawyer. The conversation that followed took 3 months. The number that was eventually agreed upon was 4 times what the railroad had offered when Caleb was alive. Margaret signed the agreement in April of 1888. The right-of-way that the railroad received was limited to a corridor 100 yards wide along the eastern edge of the pass. The ranch house, the north fields, the water rights, the cemetery where Caleb and his father were buried, all of it remained Dune land. The first train went through the pass in the spring of 1889. Thomas Dune, 17 years old, watched it from the ridge where Cole Harlan had stood on the morning of the last confrontation. He watched it with his father's eyes. Cole Harlan heard about the ruling from a newspaper in Missoula 3 weeks after it came down. He was sitting in a saloon that was warmer than most, and that had better coffee than any, which was his primary criterion for saloons in winter. He read the relevant section twice, set the newspaper down, finished his coffee, thought about Caleb, not the legend, the man. The man who had understood that the most dangerous draw was the one nobody needed to see. Who had spent 30 years building a defense that didn't need him to keep standing. Who had written a letter and put it in an iron box under a floorboard and trusted that when the time came, the right person would know what to do with it. Cole left the newspaper on the table. He paid for the coffee. He went to get Shadow. Edmund Cross was still free. The road was still long. But the Dune Ranch was still the Dune Ranch. And some things needed to be true before other things could matter. This was one of them. Shadow walked south. The legend kept moving. And somewhere in Montana, on a porch above a pass where a train now ran on a corridor 100 yards wide along the eastern edge, a woman sat in a chair that had been her husband's chair and watched the evening come in from the north with the cold that had no agenda. And the mountains were the mountains, and the land was theirs. Caleb Dune built something that kept standing after he was gone. That's the hardest thing a man can do. Not the gunfight, not the reputation, not the legend. Building something that doesn't need you. Comment below, one word. What did Caleb leave that mattered most? Because the answer to that question is the answer to what any of this is actually about. Subscribe. Stay for the next one. Tell me where you're watching from tonight. The West was changing. Men like Caleb were becoming something people read about. But the things they built, those stayed. See you on the next road.